Everyone, and welcome. We'll go ahead and get started. Please help yourself to food, drink, water, and we'll kick us off. So I'm Jason Jabari. I'm the faculty director at the Clark-Fox Policy Institute. So grateful to see all the partners, advocates, and community members here to focus on an issue that sits at the foundation of family well-being and economic opportunity, which is the cost of childcare. At the Institute, our work is guided by a pretty simple belief. When we bring research, data, and community experience together, we can help shape the systems that better support children and families. Nowhere is this more important than in childcare. When families cannot access affordable, high-quality care, the effects ripple pretty far wide. It impacts employers, providers, and limits our region and our state's economic vitality. Strengthening the child care system is not only the right thing to do for our children and our families, it's a strategic investment in Missouri's future. And that's what our conversation is going to center on tonight. So we have an opportunity to bring together some data, some lived experience, and the innovative ideas that can help Missouri build a stronger, more sustainable child care system. You'll hear from our leaders who are testing new approaches and pushing policy forward to make sure that quality care is within reach for all of our families. I'm both excited of this as a professional, but also as a person. I have 3 young kids, and so I'm excited to see these new innovative ideas come together. I want to extend our appreciation to our co-sponsors, the Center for Social Development, the Center for Education, Research, Practice, and Policy Partnerships, and the Center for Advancing Health Services Policy and Economics Research for making this event possible, and again to all of our panelists for being here tonight. It is now my great pleasure to introduce someone whose leadership continues to strengthen the Brown School's commitment to children and families. Please join in welcoming Dean Dorian Traub.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. I am the Nidor Family and Centene Corporation Dean of the Brown School. I have to say that when I start every speech. But one of my favorite parts about being the dean is getting to welcome our community to events like this, conversations that bridge research, policy, and strengthen systems that support children and families. Tonight's topic, as Professor Jabari mentioned, is very important to me, early care and education. It's very close to my heart. It is what my personal research portfolio focuses on. And I've specifically focused on family support and early childhood home visitation, and helping parents create nurturing environments where their kids can thrive. Probably more important than my research to that knowledge base is the fact that I also am a parent who has faced that struggle of how the heck are you going to find affordable childcare for your children. So I am thrilled tonight to see you all gathered here to talk about how we can make childcare not just affordable, but accessible, and most importantly, equitable for all our littlest learners. I also want to thank the Clark-Fox Policy Institute for organizing tonight's panel. The strength of our Brown School community lies in these kinds of collaborations where scholars, practitioners, and advocates come together to take on real challenges facing families. So today's panel, as you know, brings together experts who are leading efforts to improve the child care landscape in Missouri and beyond. And they're not only advancing research and policy, they're helping to build a future where every family has access to high quality care and every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential. The first time that I met Ellicia down at the end there, I think I said, it was in this room. Do you remember? And do you remember what I said? I said, my personal motto is there's no such thing as other people's children. And she just really jumped out of her seat, but that is my personal motto. So I am thrilled to sit here tonight with you all to help all children reach their full potential. So it is my pleasure now to welcome our panelists and to thank all of you for being part of this really, really important conversation. I'm now going to turn it over to Stephanie to get to introduce our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Dean Traub. So I have the great honor of introducing our panelists tonight. I'm Stephanie Anderson, the manager of the Clark Fox Policy Institute here at the Brown School. And we have a really remarkable group of women who bring deep experience and insight in early care and education policy with us tonight. First, we have Casey Hanson, who is the Deputy Director at Kids Win Missouri, who works on advancing equitable policies to improve the health, education, safety, and development of Missouri's children and families. Next, we have Ellicia Lanier, Founder and Executive Director of Urban Sprouts Child Development Center. And since 2009, she has created a space where children and families are nurtured and celebrated and supported, combining a passion for justice with innovative, meaningful learning. We also have Anna Kent with us, the formerly senior researcher at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and now an independent consultant whose work uses data and research to address economic and childcare disparities with a focus on equity, women, and wealth gaps. And moderating tonight's conversation is Tamyka Perine, the Executive Director of the Gateway Early Childhood Alliance and our Clark Fox Policy Institute Scholar in Residence. She leads a growing alliance of parents, providers, educators, and allies working to make early childhood systems more racially equitable, and she brings her insights and experience to guide tonight's discussion. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, and I'll hand it over to Tamyka to get the conversation started. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. First, I appreciate the introduction, but would love if the panelists would say a bit more about your work and how it ties to early childhood education and our policy.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Again, my name is Anna Kent. I was at the Fed for about 7 years. A lot of that time at the Institute for Economic Equity until that was sunsetted in January, and I left a few months later so I could start my own consulting company, AK Research and Consulting, and really continue what I felt was important work, which is wealth inequality, demographics of wealth specifically, and women in the economy, and then kind of how childcare plays a role in that. So at the Fed, I was a part of an early care and education working group, and we did several publications. And then separately, we also have state level fact sheets on childcare. So if you're interested in that, a lot of the reason the Fed cares about childcare is because of the impact on the workforce. And so that has a lot of connections there to the work that I've done.
Hi, again, I'm Casey Hanson with Kids Win Missouri, and we are a statewide policy and advocacy coalition working on advancing issues that impact child well-being. And so our work we typically think of in 3 different buckets: early childhood, health and mental health, and child welfare. And if you look at our staff and the amount of capacity that we spend, early childhood takes up about 80% of our work. And so we have staff all over the state working with communities, really thinking about how communities individually can address their childcare and early education challenges, and also how we as a state can do that as well. And so we have really been at that work pretty deeply since our organization was founded in 2014, but really got into it during COVID and bringing together providers from around the state just to help deal with some of the immediate policy needs during the COVID period. But that led us to kind of developing a longer term vision for early childhood in the state. And since then, we've been working with parents, providers, business and community leaders to lead an effort at the state level to advocate for some transformational policies. So very excited to talk with you about that tonight.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ellicia Lanier, and I'm the inaugural Clark Fox Policy Scholar. So excited to be here to see this still going. And thank you so much, Stephanie, Dean Traub, and Jason for having us tonight. I'm a mother. And according to Dean Traub, I'm a mother of all the children. I would say that role really leads my advocacy work. I am the founder of Urban Sprouts Child Development Center, which I founded for my daughter, Alexis, in 2009. And all my children have had the pleasure of going through that school. And I see parents and other folks whose children have had the pleasure of going along the journey with us. My role in advocacy is both local, lots of local advocacy. I was a part of the We Power playbook that we wrote to really spark change and reimagine the early childhood system. I worked on a couple ballot initiatives. I've worked with Casey a lot. We've seen a lot of policy change. Kids Win is doing a phenomenal job at the state level. We take groups of folks up to the state yearly, providers and parents for Child Advocacy Day. So my organization, along with a couple other organizations, take folks up there. Let's see, on a national level, I work with Raising Childcare Fund, the Children's Action Network, Trust for Learning, and a couple other organizations to really think about how the federal policies are impacting our state policies, which impact our local work. And our school participates yearly in the Day Without Childcare, which is a national early childhood movement to garner the attention of employers and policymakers around the need for childcare and its impacts on the workforce. So, yeah, I'm a little bit involved in everything. True. True.
Just a little involved. So, with all of your experience and from your perspectives, what do you think is the biggest misconception surrounding childcare, specifically the cost of care?
Well, I think somebody else on this panel can deal with this question more personally in their professional life. But I would say the biggest misconception that I hear is oftentimes, and I have 3 kids, 1 on the way, and all of them went through childcare, early care and education. Related to cost, I would say that the biggest misconception is, well, childcare providers are just raking it in. It's expensive because they just have a surplus and they're making a lot of money. Not the people that they employ necessarily, but the people that own, right? The early care and education centers. And I don't think people quite realize that a lot of times they're just trying to make ends meet, and a huge cost of that is actually paying the people that aren't paid well at all, that could maybe get a higher paying job somewhere else and not have all the stresses that come with caring for very young children. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception.
That's a good one. That's probably the best one that I would think of too. I think the other thing that not a lot of people think about or realize, maybe especially those that don't have children, is just what the burden is on a family to pay for childcare, especially if they have more than one child. In Missouri, for most families that have children, childcare is more expensive than their housing costs. And as we know, just like everything else, those costs continue to rise all of the time and are a burden on families. So I think those that are maybe a little bit outside of it don't necessarily fully grasp that burden. And when we look at, just things like population declining in St. Louis City and County, and the birth rate kind of going down, which is something we hear about a lot. A lot of these things can go back to what it costs to raise a child. And so I don't know that it's a misconception, but it's just something that I don't think enough people are thinking about seriously and connecting the dots between all of those things.
As a childcare provider, I would plus one. Casey won the burden to parents. I think parents want to see their children do well, and the cost of a quality childcare center is literally not accessible to most, right? Don't jump out your seat when I say this, but I just talked to Dean Trout. She's like, "Oh, your waiting list is at 300. No, it's at 650. 650 children. And that doesn't make me happy when I say that. People are like, "Oh my God, congratulations." Like, no, 650 children don't have a space to go. So I think I think that that's a misconception, that like parents Parents are choosy. Parents want not good childcare, and they want it to also be affordable. But you have to make the choice between affordable childcare and quality. And I don't think that parents should have to do that. I think for me personally, the biggest misconception is that we as a nation cannot do this. We can make childcare free. And we can do many things, and we can do many things well, but this is the solution to all of our problems. I promise you. If we can send folks to work, if we can educate people early, if we have early intervention, we would see a different social climate in 20 years. We would see a different workforce in 20 years. We would see our neighborhoods change. They would be safer. So I think the misconception that early childhood is just babysitting and not the actual solution is wild. I follow the lead of leaders around the world who have gotten it right. I don't really look in my backyard for solutions solely, right? Because I love my neighbors, and there's lots of us that are doing wonderful things, but there is world-renowned education systems that are built on early childhood, and their whole municipalities are focused on the children. And so I think that if, as a nation, we can keep ourselves together, we could you got to do this.
So we know I ideally, I don't know if it's working, but I have a voice of character. So we talk about education if we can get ourselves together to do a lot better. There are places to do a lot better. We have New Mexico that has universal child care. Those like Missouri who has some work to do. So, and when it comes to our neighboring states in Missouri, the cost of child care,
How does Missouri really compare?
Yeah, so Missouri is, I looked it up because I like, what are our neighboring states? And we are tied for the most states that we touch, apparently, along with Tennessee. We touch 7. So compared to the 7 states that we touch, we're kind of like upper part of the pack in terms of what the average cost of care for a child is. Estimates vary depending on the assumptions you make as a researcher. I would say we're kind of the Fed estimates that I'm going to talk about are sort of at the lower end. So keep that in mind because it's still fairly high. So in Missouri, average cost of care for a child is just north of $9,000 per year per child. Of course, that varies if you're in rural Missouri or if you're in Kansas City or if you're in St. Louis. And it also varies a lot by the age of the child, which I think is another thing people don't necessarily realize. So if you're talking about an infant, it's about $14,000. And if you're talking about a preschool age child, it's about half that. So there's a pretty wide range depending on how old the child is. And talking about misconceptions, this is something that I learned as I was doing research on this topic. But it's that universal and free pre-K sometimes can actually be a burden on early care and education centers because you're pulling out this age group that really subsidizes the younger age group. So again, getting back to your question on how Missouri does, only 2 of our neighboring states are higher. And yet we can talk about cost, but we also have to talk about affordability. And those are kind of 2 somewhat separate things because different states have different median incomes, of course. So you probably heard, I see a lot of nods. So I'm guessing a lot of people have familiarity. You might have heard of the 7% affordability number, right? No more than 7% of a household's income should go to childcare. Well, in some states, it kind of meets that. Again, if we're talking about the average, not the infant for anybody, if we're talking about a household with young kids who actually tend to have a higher median income than just the average overall, or the median overall, rather. So that's part of it. But actually, Arkansas and Oklahoma are at roughly 11%. So they're higher than us, which is about 10%. So still not affordable. And then if you have somebody who has 2 kids, or at one point I had 3 kids in early care and education, that was very expensive. So then you get into this talk of choices. And when I think about choices and what families choose, I often think in terms of constrained choices versus true choices. And oftentimes what families are making are these constrained choices because of this financial crunch that they're faced with?
So, can you talk to us about what some of the economic costs and consequences are of that high childcare?
Yeah, absolutely. So, following on that kind of high burden and what had been talked about before, depending on the stats you're using, the reports you're using, sometimes it can be higher than in-state tuition for a year, right? It can be higher than rent or housing costs. So it's a very large burden. And remember that these families oftentimes are they're younger, right? They have young kids. And so they're kind of at the beginning of their career trajectories, their income and wealth trajectories. So they might be dealing with student loan debt at the same time that they're trying to also pay for this. They're trying to advance in their careers, and yet they feel this really strong burden. And so for families that are lucky enough to have two parents in the household, they can make a decision but maybe it makes sense for one of the people, usually the woman, right, in a mixed sex couple to stay back with the kids. That might make financial sense for them for a couple of years, but it's not a straight calculation of do you have is childcare more expensive? Because you have to think sort of long term. Am I putting money down for retirement? Is that going to impact me later on? And are we going to lose health care if I leave? Or is my spouse's health care going to be more expensive? Are we maybe going to save money? And I'm like literally talking from experience now since I left my job 3 months ago. Are we going to save money because we don't have to eat out every single night and I can spend time cooking? So there's a lot more into the calculation. It's more complex. So I think the most direct connection obviously is to the family and the individual. But another huge misconception is that that's it, right? That it has no impact on businesses, on companies, on society, on the economy in general. And that's a huge misconception. Obviously, it does. Some of these connections, I think part of the problem with what you were talking about, I completely agree that we can do this as a nation, but a lot of those benefits are long term, right? We're not going to see them. A politician isn't going to see them at the end of their election cycle when they're up for reelection, right? It's going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So I think that's part of the reason we haven't invested in these things, because it's not going to benefit us in the short term immediately as a nation, as clearly as the research shows that it would, right? But to wrap it up, yeah, companies benefit too. They don't have to be faced with absenteeism, with people choosing like I did. And I'm certainly not the only one. So one of the trends, economically speaking, this past year is that women are leaving the workforce, particularly highly educated women are leaving the workforce in droves. And two of the things that oftentimes come up are burnout and childcare, or just care, blanket care, also elder care related reasons. So I think that is really weighing down on companies. Mizzou has an economic impact report that shows almost $1 billion from those two things, absenteeism and turnover that I just talked about, to companies. That's a big cost annually speaking. And then overall the economy, of course, we're losing out on tax revenue too. So there's a lot of things. I will give it the mic to somebody else, but there's a lot of reasons that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not just a family or individual issue. It's an all of us issue.
Thanks. So, Ellicia, as a provider, from your perspective, have the rising costs and workforce shortages impacted your ability to provide consistent quality care?
Or have you seen it across the ecosystem?
So I would say I see it across the ecosystem. I actually have had I'm pretty fortunate from, I can't really use my program to kind of talk about the region, because I think there's a lot, like we're still learning, but our program is a mixed income model, and that's what saves us, right? So if Head Start gets scary, then we have a meeting and I say, okay, this isn't what we want to do. But then I have a waiting list of 650 of parents who pay, right? So 76% of the children who attend our school for free to little cost. are on Head Start, state subsidies, and all of those subsidized care streams. And then we have this 24% that is private pay that really kind of holds us up, right? The cost of care in the region really varies. An infant at our school, a quality school, is $20,000. I think, it's a little frustrating from the provider's standpoint because when cost is talked about, it's always lower than what it really costs. Because when the calculations of what this true cost of care comes out to be, it does not include healthcare and all the essentials that so many childcare providers are going without to save this nation, right? Childcare is holding the nation up, but the workers are declining, right? There's really, really poor health, low wages, in many of the centers. And so what we're seeing is when those subsidies are taken away from centers who solely, depend on those, then it really creates a really heavy impact on the ability for them to care for children. And we've had, I don't know, a nice amount of centers that have decided not to even take state subsidies anymore just because you're so dependent on the state to provide, right? Because parents can't afford childcare. Many childcare centers are operating off of state subsidies just to stay open. And they go without meeting their own needs to care for the children. For us, a lot of the economic impacts that we are seeing is really tied to the workforce of early childhood because of the lack of braided models like a Flance and some of the other centers who are kind of getting some of it right as much as we can, right? And we're still solving and we are still working to be actionable around how we can make it better. I think we are seeing that a lot of the folks that are in the workforce are leaving because the pay is so low. There's very few benefits. And so even though we're getting it right, the attraction to the field is just so sad. They, like the community college, they cancel courses every semester because of low enrollment. And so folks are not coming to the field, and that's scary, right? Because you want people who want to be here. And we want people to go and get educated because it's a neuroscience, but then you can't afford to be educated in this workforce. So it's just a lot to solve for, right? You go and get this degree and then you only make $17 an hour, or you can take that same degree and go to the school district. So there are a lot of choices that are being made, not just amongst the family, but the workforce as well.
So Casey, I know that there's a lot of work you've been doing both state and nationally to help stand up a model to support funding childcare. Can you talk a bit about the work that you've been doing both statewide and nationally?
So for the last couple of years, we've been working on securing childcare funding in a couple of different forms at the state level. The biggest source of funding for childcare in Missouri is the Childcare Subsidy Program, which is a federal program. And then the state provides some match for that. And then each state kind of based on a formula gets a certain amount of money, but that really is for serving very low income working families or families that are going to school. And in Missouri, we have some of the lowest eligibility in the nation for that. So it's a great source of funding for our families that are most in need. But with the way costs are for childcare, every family almost needs some kind of help or could use some kind of help to have relief from that. So we were able to also get some additional pre-K funds specifically for pre-K through public schools, and then some additional grant funds for pre-K through childcare programs. But again, the eligibility for that is still, it's not as low as subsidy, but it's still a lower eligibility aligned with kind of the free and reduced lunch. But there is a lot more money in the system for children to be able to access pre-K, especially through public schools and charter schools, and then some community partnerships. The other model that we've been working on that's kind of a public-private partnership is a cost-sharing model that we call Childcare Works. We kind of, through working with the 17 communities that we work with around the state, the one commonality is just the affordability issue. There's lots of layers to the issues with childcare. We also have a workforce issue. We have a supply issue. But affordability for families and then stable income for providers are two pain points that are really felt in every community throughout the state. So we worked with our communities and kind of inspired by a model being used in a couple of other states, this idea of setting up cost sharing for childcare. So the state pays a portion, ideally the employer pays a portion, and then the family pays a portion, and that splits up the cost of childcare three ways. In Michigan, they were kind of the initial one to do it. It's called a tri-share. We call ours Childcare Works, but our model is actually a little bit more flexible. So while we were working to get some state funding for the tri-share idea, we were also working with Congressman Jason Smith at the federal level to get some changes to a federal tax credit, the employer provider tax credit. And so that the 45F tax credit has been around for a really long time. And it's basically a credit that, employers can get some federal tax relief for providing that benefit of childcare to their employees, but it was very underutilized, a very low tax credit, all of those things. So we did some work to reform it. And now it was included in HR 1, or what's commonly referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And it basically increased the tax credit. So now small businesses can get a 50% federal tax credit, and large businesses can get a 40% federal tax credit for any money they put towards their employees' childcare. So how we kind of built that into Childcare Works. Now the Childcare Works system can be used for a dual share, which is, two-way share between the employer and the parent only. And that system will process the tax credits and all of the things that are needed for the employer to claim that tax credit. We also have state funds that are available to pilot like a limited tri-share model that we were talking about, where if the employer puts in, they can also leverage that state funding. We were only able to get about $2.5 million for that in the first year. We had gone for $5 million. The legislature passed it. The governor vetoed half of it. So we're launching this program as we speak. I think Tamyka and some of our other communities got word today that they could start enrolling parents and employers, which is really exciting. But it's very limited. The tri-share piece is very limited still. So, and then we also left our model open to where it doesn't have to just be sharing it between the employer and the state and the parent. There's also the ability to have a community funding source. So whether that be a foundation that maybe wants to put in some money to help offset where employers aren't putting in, or if a locality, which folks are exploring here in St. Louis County and City, wanted to pass their own tax, they could also put those local funds into the system. But yeah, the Childcare Works system is kind of we're working with a vendor, Tutris, and it's neat because they collect all of the payments. So they'll take the payments from the state, they take the payments from the employer, they take the payments from the parent, and then the provider gets that single payment, which is kind of a big deal because Ellicia was talking about they're blending and braiding all these different funding sources. So for them to be able to have kind of that single payment at the beginning of the month, all of those things. We really think, it's going to help parents, obviously. We hope it's going to help employers too. They can have a new benefit. They can hopefully recruit and retain employees better. And then also for providers, creating more stability in kind of how they're getting paid too. So very excited about it. We think, we're not the first state to do this model of cost sharing, but we are the first state that's going to have this kind of technology system set up around it to be able to also make all of the payments, as I was talking about, process all the tax credits. So we think some other states will be adopting this model too. And then hopefully maybe we can get some synergy around getting some federal dollars put into it as well. So very exciting. And if any of you are employers in the room or employees, definitely we'll make sure you have information to share out after to sign up for the Childcare Works emails and things, because we're just in the initial stages. And so a lot of the work the next year or two is going to be getting the word out to employers, letting them know there's a new tax credit they can access. They might be able to draw down state money. And hopefully we can start really making childcare more affordable for families. I will say too, I didn't say the income eligibility is much higher for Childcare Works as well. So especially for those tri-share dollars from the state, parents can have incomes up to 550% of federal poverty, which is a much higher income threshold. And then the way we have it worked out in the system, depending where their income is, there's kind of a sliding scale for what the state contribution would be. So parents that are, much closer to that 200% of federal poverty will still have a higher benefit. And then the parents that are making the much higher incomes won't have quite as much of a benefit, but still some relief and some benefit. So it's exciting.
It sounds like this could really be impactful. Ellicia, can you talk about how this could possibly, as a model, impact your teachers and staff, especially in terms of wages and retention and even maybe morale? Because as a provider, if you're a provider, you could also be an employer, right, Casey? So.
Okay, so she's gonna hate me for doing this, but can we all give Kids Win a round of applause for this? I think we don't celebrate our wins enough. We work really hard in ECE. I just am pass the message along to Brian as well, but I know how much Casey and Brian care about this. We fight a lot, but I mean, good fight. Because it's not easy and there's a lot of nuances, and they know I'm not going to just say flowery things just because they asked me to. So I'll say what I need to say about it, right? I'll say first, we are excited to see this take flight. We've watched Detroit and some other states be really successful at this model. One of the things that Urban Sprouts has done from our inception, it has been to provide 50% off to all of our staff members. So that's not new on us. We do have partnerships like WashU where their children are coming to our center. So we're excited to think about how those larger systems can be thinking about how some of this can work, and those relationships that we have. So we are going to be both a recipient for some of our employers' benefits for our families, and then we're also our staff, we're going to enroll as a business. So that's kind of what we were talking about. We'll be both. We'll be both the employer and the child care center. So we have, I think it's a great recruitment tool. So I'm hoping that more child care centers take this on and provide a child care benefit to their teachers as a way of recruiting staff. I think, you get a teacher for that good 4 years. While their child is young, they at least stay. And so that's kind of nice And then when they start getting to pre-K, we start seeing a little change, and they get weird on me. I'm like, it's okay. If you need to leave when your child goes to kindergarten, but I'm grateful for consistent 4 to 5 years of service. And some folks will have multiple children, right? Because they get this benefit. So I'm excited to see what it does internally for childcare centers. As far as the region, I think we're going to have to do a lot of matchmaking. A lot of the childcare centers are smaller and don't really have a lot of the business relationships. So a lot of work is going to go into that. And so I'm just interested to see what that would look like. Because a lot of folks just pass childcare centers up, and they're working for huge corporations right around the corner, or even small businesses. So I think a lot of that matchmaking, and as the word gets out through like RBC and all of the other, business connections that we have here in St. Louis, it'll grow and be well. I think you said something about teachers, but did you say that? Yeah, we kind of already do that. And so it really is not like a direct benefit to the teachers. The benefit will be to the school, the business. And so because we subsidized it prior, it'll be nice that that doesn't come out of our bottom line. So we're excited about that, because right now I think we have like 5. So can I talk about parents? Because you asked me about teachers and I love parents. So to Casey's point, and I want to like not be confusing because there's just a lot in my head and I use a lot of ECE lingo. Okay, so the families that qualify for like subsidy and Head Start, there's a like huge amount of families, and we're constantly trying to figure out that balance. But I think that there like a lot of centers struggle with that working class. So I think this is going to be very beautiful for that working class to stay at work for and for the childcare centers to start using that braided income model of not just taking subsidy, but also having these cash paying parents. So yeah, that's what I would say. I'm excited about the working class families, like middle income, that are like trying to figure out like how do we afford a car or childcare. I mean, really, people are like walking to our school because it's one or the other. So.
Yeah, related to that, I think getting the word out is going to be so critical for this, because there's already, this isn't new, but people have benefits their company offers that they don't know about. And so they don't think about it. And imagine how much worse it is if you don't already work at that company where they might be offering this kind of benefit. So I say that because the census has come out with a report a couple of years back, and they showed that the most common type of care that people used if they used care for young kids was actually a non-parent relative. And so, if that's kind of your go-to, first of all, you're very likely not paying them what you would be paying a care center or a home-based center or a home-based care business. And so if you have this, my hope would be that because it's more affordable for parents, that more of them are thinking about either home-based care or, paying the people that are already providing care for their kids more, because they're able to with that tri-share model.
And so it's a pretty innovative program. And Ellicia, you're doing some innovative things at Urban Sprouts. You are doing some things with housing for your teachers. Can you tell us about that and what you're working on there?
Okay. So again, we're always learning from people next door around the corner. I have a friend, a very good friend named Alex in Connecticut. She founded the Friend Center in New Haven, and she's really been interested in solving the teacher crisis. And so about 3 years ago, they started investing in teacher housing. And this teacher housing is a direct cost savings to the organization because the cost of the housing is wrapped into the teacher's salary. So they kind of can like give the teachers a nice salary and then take this, benefit out of the teacher's pay. Now, they're not reducing people's pay to make this work. So it's kind of like for the seasoned staff, you kind of take the raise, and it's a weird model on how we're going to get there, but it works. And right now, the organization is saving like $660,000 a year on payroll. And so not only is it helping to put teachers in like brand new housing that Yale is building, they get a well-being coach and they go from like, struggling to thriving. And it's really nice for philanthropy because there's like a one-time cost benefit, right? Sometimes philanthropy is like, don't come back. We've given to you year over year, figure it out. But, philanthropy can buy a house and it becomes an asset to the school and can an engine for recruitment. And so anyway, we have adopted their model. And so our friends from IFF, they're adopting this model in Minnesota and also Detroit. I mean, we do a lot of what we do is like with we do a lot together, all of us. And so we didn't make this up, but Urban Sprouts purchased his first home, and we have 2 teachers who'll be moving in next month. And so the cost of the house was like $100,000. And then like, they were like, $3,000 a month to one house. And take that burden out on. And you'd be surprised, we have people quitting saying, I don't do more. We have one of the folks that's going into the house, she drives from Lake St. Louis. We have at least 39 different zip codes currently. I know it's but people are out there. And so we're trying to figure out how, like, what are the barriers? Like, if you came to work, right, you're late or don't have gas money or Uber are expected. So the model is really about making sure that the house is within walking distance of the schools with like 2 blocks away, right across from the elementary school. Okay, there we go. And so it's 2 blocks away. And the other thing I think we worked really hard on this year with our board is benefits. So we used to provide 50% benefits, and I was gunning for 100. I just would not let up. I did this whole research study, and like it took me 3 months to like work all this stuff out. We paid a consultant to help us, and we still didn't. Our board, they wanted them, to have a little skin in the game, and I get it, but I wanted teachers to have 100% benefits. And we ended up getting to 90% as a school. So we're really proud of that. So 90% benefits. So that's health, dental, vision. And we are doing a cost sharing. Well, I mean, so now we're doing a cost like match in their 401ks, 403bs, because it's a nonprofit. And then what else are we doing? Tuition stuff. So yeah, just really trying to be creative on how we can solve some of this workforce issues. So it's exciting. The house is very beautiful. I'd love to live there. And we want to make sure we keep folks' dignity intact. So we, it's a really nice house, and the goal is to take them through credit building and money management and things like that, so that folks are not staying in the house past 3 years, and work with them to move out the house, buy their own home, and we move someone else in. But it would cost us nothing, right? Because we own it. So I'm excited to acquire more assets for the school as a way of leveraging income and just so many. I mean, we really have to honestly just not even think like a nonprofit. You got to be a business and a nonprofit. I know it sounds crazy, but it's what works. And you have to wear all the hats in order for us to solve all this stuff. But there are lots of great things happening. Our state subsidy rates were increased. So much work Kids Win and local providers and rural providers and lots of folks. And so I think we're moving in the right direction as a nation. We just have to keep making sure that people know that this is important. And so we hope that this becomes important to you, right? I know everybody has their social issues, but this is a very, very important one. Our youngest members of our society deserve to have an incredible start to life, and people should go to work and know that their children are safe and well cared for. So it's simple for me always, not too much, but always a lot.
So Anna, listening to some of these things and thinking about how the economy is and how some of these shifts, we're purchasing people's homes within childcare now and bringing in the business community. Can you kind of speak to how some of those can lend to some of the upticks in the economy overall, and what we may see coming up?
What we may see coming up if we implement some of these changes. Yeah, I mean, I think being really conscientious and having a variety of people at the table when we're implementing is so critical. Variety of people being, researchers, experts, being providers, being parents, being people in the community, maybe who don't even have kids, like who are just faced with potential tax burdens, and trying to get everybody sort of on board to understand, again, that this is a collective issue. I think that's really critical because sometimes in this space and in other spaces, when policies have been implemented, they've been rushed or they just have had unforeseen consequences. I'm thinking of my earlier example of pre-K being free. Like, we have to think through something that on the surface is really, really good, but can have sort of unintended consequences. So if all of that is done well, which I think we have good people leading that effort, then, I mean, the research is fairly clear that there's benefits, right? I mean, the earlier that you put in money in life and in just in general, the greater the return on investment is. So I think that's fairly clear. Some of the pretty famous studies, Perry Preschool Project, Hepkin Equation, I see nods. Those have really shown that it's a benefit long-term. Again, this is kind of talking about the long-term benefits that I was alluding to before. It's good for society, right? Recidivation rates go down. People are more likely to be able to buy a home or a car when they've gone to high quality. And that's really key here, is high quality early care and education. So it's not just babysitting, which is another misconception, right? It is high quality care that your child is safe, they're being educated, they're getting that social quality interaction too. So I think if all of those things kind of come together and are done in a really thoughtful manner, then of course we're going to have really great benefits down the line.
So Casey, we know that the providers have been working really hard and Kids Win has been working really hard. What can the community and business leaders do to support these shifts?
Well, I mean, I think with businesses especially, just want to see them jump into this, right? This is a big opportunity for them to be incentivized to do something that will hopefully help them and then help working people and children. And so I feel like obviously I'm sold, but it's a win-win for everybody. So with businesses, I mean, we want them to sign up, get on board and be serving more families. We have a lot of advocacy to do. We've talked about we've painted a very rosy picture, which it has been. We've been very lucky to make progress. We've had 2 governors in a row who have been very supportive of this issue. But the reality is we're kind of headed into a time where our state is going to have much tougher budgets. It's going to, we're losing we've lost a lot of the money that was kind of helping stabilize some things during COVID. There's been substantial federal cuts to programs like SNAP and Medicaid that coming into this next budget year, we're going to have to figure out how are we going to fund all of those things and keep these investments going and hopefully add more to the investment. Like I said, we got kind of a small investment to pilot this, but we really want to blow it up even more. So a lot of advocacy. We need a lot of advocacy and folks talking to their legislators, folks showing up at the Capitol, and showing up to support providers and families in the community. And so I think it'll really take all of us. Also, just continuing to defend those investments like Head Start and the federal childcare funds, because, in Missouri, most of the money that's in the system, even though we've made some really great gains and great policy decisions at the state level, most of the money in that system is still federal money. So I think long-term too, just visioning, are there other ways that we can generate revenue to dedicate to this at the state level, so that we have the state funding to kind of fill that gap? I know others have mentioned it, but a long time ago, we decided as a society that, investing in K-12 education as a public good is worthwhile. And I think, the brain science and everything shows us that this period between 0 and 5 is so foundational for children in terms of their social trajectory, in terms of their ability to achieve long-term, and to really be set up with a good start. And so I think we just have to continue having that conversation about what is our obligation to invest in the 0 to 5 frame, as though it's a public good as well. And, the return on investment and the data, they're all there. So just figuring out how we can continue to kind of push the needle, invest more in early childhood, and hopefully be able to see all those things together. So.
And I was just going to add, I think part of that is this lack of society having caught up with the economic realities of today. The fact that women are very likely to be either the primary or co-breadwinner in a family. They're working, right? Just like men are working. We make up roughly half the workforce. So I think that is a reality that we haven't accepted as a society. We still say, oh, it's a dual parent household. The woman stays behind, like that's as it should be, right? We say that it's a burden of the family when that's not the economic reality. And yeah, we know as researchers that there's this motherhood penalty, the income gap, and especially the wage gap, that doesn't actually show up for women and men that have never been married until they have kids. So I think that is a very critical thing. And then women have much less income and wealth, and their labor force participation rates are also lower once they have kids, especially if those kids are young, if they're under 5. So I think, again, we haven't caught up to that economic reality, but it is reality. And so we have to really address it with these kinds of policies.
So I want to make sure everyone has time to ask questions if they'd like. So we're going to wrap up with one last thing. What gives you hope about the future of childcare funding in Missouri?
These ladies to my right, I think there's been really great work. As a researcher, COVID really was this time when I think people's eyes were open that weren't in the field in many ways, because literally on conference calls, you would have a child crying in the background or running across, scampering behind, right? And that really opened things up. Now it's not as tight of a labor market as when we had the bulk of the recovery. So that companies are pulling back. And so that is frustrating to me as a woman, as a mother, as a researcher. But I think in general, like these issues aren't new, and yet we have more momentum than we have had. Hopefully that's not speaking out of turn.
Yeah. It's just hopeful that we've made progress on this issue. Sometimes we go to conferences with other states and they're like, oh, you're from Missouri. What's that like? And I think they have like preconceived notions of what it is like to be from Missouri. But we've just, over the last couple of years, seen so many parents and providers and people all throughout the state in the most rural most rural communities to the most urban communities in our state have all come together for this purpose. And it's really centering children and families. And it feels like we're binding together to do the right thing, which feels really good. And so even though there have definitely been some tough battles we faced together and probably some tough ones that we have ahead, it's really hopeful to me that there are so many people in Missouri that are moving in this direction, and we are making progress. So.
I think because of the scarcity of resources in the past, it was really hard to see a path forward. But I think we finally kind of gotten to the Mr. Rogers, will you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Right? Like we're working hard and we're working together. I think across the nation, you're right. We go many places and they're like, ooh, it must be hard. But I think we've made some gains. For providers. We're always like, yes, and more, because we see the direct impact that this funding and lack thereof has on families and teachers. And even with the gains, it's still really challenging. I won't say I can't leave you and say we're moving along and it's just so wonderful. Even with the increases in subsidy, the cost of living is so high that we're just trying to figure out what is that balance and where does the burden always fall on the childcare provider and the parents, which then stresses the children, right? And so we just have so much more to do. And I just want everybody in here to join our neighborhood of early childhood, please, and figure out a small way to get involved. Action is how we're going to move this forward. We need more people, more smarts, more hearts. Yeah, I mean, anything is possible, right? I'm a dreamer, so I definitely, believe that I'm going to see, at the end of my career, I'm going to see, what we thought was impossible. I believe that, and I think I got like another 30 years, so we're good.
Thank you. So your turn. Oh, that was quick. All right, go ahead.
So how they were hoping with the idea of how you kind of this collaboration with early childhood education.
Yeah, I mean, I would say early childhood is a social issue, right? Of just like it should be a right. The Reggio Emilia model that I talked about in Reggio Emilia, Italy, was born out of World War II, and the notion that everybody should have the right to a quality education from birth. And so that in itself is just always keeping us really grounded at Urban Sprouts around how do we continue to fight for what should be the right to children, right? This access, this high quality, good food, like food access is huge right now. And so many social issues we're fighting, kind of like what she said at Kids when they do like 80% of ECE, but it's Medicaid, it's all the things, safety, good neighborhoods, right? And so for me, this is the top social justice issue because it leads to the solutions to so many other things. But that's just me, right? But I've seen it happen in different parts of the world. New Zealand is another place that's made some huge early childhood investments. China, I mean, the world is doing this. We need to catch up.
I think there's a lot of crossover in the health space too, for a number of reasons. We worked in 2020 on getting Medicaid expansion passed in Missouri, which a lot of early childhood educators, Ellicia kind of mentioned it, don't have access to healthcare. And so getting Medicaid expansion, 7 years. Okay, Siri. She's gonna jump in and tell me. So that was a big one. And then, it's kind of in our face right now with what just happened with the shutdown and the Affordable Care Act subsidies. I know when the Inflation Reduction Act passed and those enhanced subsidies were available, it made a huge difference for early childhood providers who didn't fall in that Medicaid expansion group, still didn't have health care, but maybe they could finally afford something a little bit more out of pocket. So we're really heading into a crisis. I'm on the board at my son's early childhood center. I should have mentioned that before. But so I get to hear about a lot of these, decisions from the business side of early childhood too. And I mean, everybody's health premiums are going up really bad next year. Maybe, we don't know the full scale of it yet either. So there's a ton of crossover there. And when we think about children and care, a lot of children, for a number of reasons, are coming into care with more behavioral challenges, higher needs, and that all weighs back on the staff's health and mental health. Quality care, which we've said that word a number of times, is all dependent on the caregiver themselves being healthy and cared for, having access to paid time off, paid sick leave, all of those things. And so I see a ton of crossover really between health and early childhood as issues that are inextricably linked as well. So
I think they said it. Other questions?
Questions. First is about urban scout and how it's really successful as to provide a lot of benefits to the teachers and the housing. My question is why do you think that what made it successful and how can it scale to allow more others into this? The second question is we talk about we made the elementary schools and high school university free, and why can't we do the early education free? And that mindset, we already have so much research about how important it is. And the recent, I don't know a lot about it, but I heard from New York, the new mayor, that they are about to provide free childcare. And why is it seems like we're changing that mindset and thinking that might be possible, and why they were able to think that way, I guess, and why we can get that later in those other small scale experimental to show the benefits, I guess, the real ones.
We have some friends in New Mexico, an organization called Olay. They singly made sure that this passed. It took them 10 years to make childcare free. We were so proud and so excited as a nation of folks who are crazy about ECE policy because they just didn't give up. And I think Olay started with my friend and two other people. So I think that we're also waiting for everybody to get on board. And that's not something you can do. At Urban Sprouts, I really don't wait for people to get on board. I'm I'm doing this. But I bring a lot of smart people around me. So kind of with the teacher housing, as she was saying, we learned what worked for them, what didn't work, what would they do different. We brought in accountants, attorneys, all these folks to think about the cliffs, right? What do we have to set a salary at for people to be able to still live and maintain, right? What makes people want to come to work every day? And in terms of sharing, we are sharing our work with many providers. We work with a group of providers out of 24-1, which is a community of 24 municipalities and 30 childcare centers. And Urban Sprouts is really committed to quality in terms of the system. And then also sharing our business models. I was just sitting here thinking that a lot of the investment really needs to happen and learning needs to happen amongst the childcare center owners on how to I mean, I think a lot of childcare owners love children, right? But then like that business piece of how to run a successful business is what's lacking. And so I think that's really where the business sector can lean in and where we have a lot of work to do. But I think that's where also communities of practice are important, and places like Urban Sprouts, like everybody's like, move to Texas, move downtown, come bring one to West County. And they're always trying to get me to duplicate this, but like, I don't want to. I want people to learn with us and alongside us. So we develop a community of practice, and we're using that model to kind of share with folks both locally and across the nation. So that's kind of how we plan to scale. I know Tamyka works on the regional side and can really talk about where they're going in terms of, what they're doing for providers regionally. And there's a lot of research going into like what is next. But we do know that the system needs a lot of thought and repair and investment. And so I think we're working on that. And over time, we'll start to see that, some of the things that we're learning from like the pilots will then take flight, and then it'll just keep growing from there. I would say.
I was going to say, I mean, Ellicia is really good at fundraising, and she brings in, She brings in a lot of other resources. So, I mean, scaling that is hard, I would say. But I mean, I think that's why we're so dedicated to just getting more foundational money into programs, because I mean, it's not right that like you said, not like a lot of them are childcare providers. They're not necessarily a business leader, or they're not business minded, and they, to some degree, should they have to be, because you want them to be able to focus on that business of taking care of the children. And so I think that's why we are focused on the system does need more money, so that they aren't having to spend necessarily all that additional time fundraising. Not that, in the short term, that is kind of just the system that we live in too.
Let me say, so we're larger now, but we haven't always been. So we have gotten to a better fundraising model. I mean, she's on the outside looking in. We just got here, right? Like this is like a new Sunday morning, like the last couple of years. But we started off with 30 children. And I would say that amongst us directors, they all will, I have one in here who will tell you we are constantly sharing our policies. They call me for, how do I do this? How do I do a budget? And so you can raise rates, and if you don't know how to spend your money, you. And so I absolutely know that we don't need business degrees, but we need business support, right? There are some essential, vital things for that thing to run. And I think the more that we share that, the more that we invest. My mentee is in the back, and I have one. I don't have a lot, and she has listened. She has met with me. We have gotten her accredited. We've worked on her business model, her budget, and she's like expanding into another center and doing so many incredible things, but it's staying close and listening and partnering up. So those shared models do work.
I was going to say too, at the systems level, and in some of our communities, they are piloting what's called shared services too, which is literally like sharing the back office support, so that, you'd have one central organization that could do accounting and, I don't know, name something else off besides accounting. HR. So the central organization could do that for multiple early childhood centers in one area. And so, that's one way to kind of take some of those business responsibilities off of providers. But yeah, the peer mentor models and all of that they have going on in the short term, I still believe we need more money to answer. Yeah. To answer the second question, in Missouri, I mean, we are a low tax state, and our government intends to continue pursuing elimination of income tax and some of those other things. So places like New Mexico or Florida have other things to tax, like tourism, or they might have rare minerals under the ground or something else that they can generate revenue from, which we don't. Yeah, but those are dedicated though, and it's as much money as you would think. But I know it's there. But so I think that's our challenge here in Missouri with how do we generate the revenue then if we're cutting taxes and not willing to raise taxes to support it? Because ultimately, if we want to extend to a 0 to 12 or even a 2 to 12 system, we need additional funding. It's difficult to do that as a low tax state and then as a country as well. I think it's pretty similar at the national level. So I think we just need to rethink as a nation, as a state, how we're collecting revenue and what we're dedicating it towards. And are there other ways we can structure our tax system or things that allow us to generate the revenue that's needed to fund these types of programs too? So
I know there's one more question, but I just wanted to add, I think one of the things too is that, and in the research I've seen this very recently, people are connecting early care and education with elder care. And I think that's a really great connection to have, because one of the things I hear, we're coming up with Thanksgiving, everyone has their old curmudgeonly uncle who just says whatever he wants to say, right? And so people sometimes think that, well, I don't have young kids anymore, or my kids are grown, or I've never had kids. Like, why is it a me issue? And I think when we group early care and education with elder care, that's a really powerful thing to do, because almost everybody has an elderly relative that needs care or will need care at some point, this huge sandwich generation that millennials are coming upon. So I think that's really critical. And then I say that because to Alicia's point of looking to other countries, I can't remember which Scandinavian country it is, Finland maybe, but they have this cool model where they have like college age students that live with an elder person. And so they get that housing for free. They take care of them and are sort of this companion for a year. And then they get their college, or I think it was college, paid for them. So I think there's like ways we can think about that, or just from a business perspective, when we can group those things together, paid family leave, which of course we are the only industrialized country that doesn't have that, right? Then I think people can sort of swallow it a little bit better and are saying, okay, well, it's going to benefit me in some way, because if that's not a direct benefit, it's harder for people to sort of get on board. So if we can sort of group these things together, I think that's a powerful thing.
Last question.
Sorry.
Are they setting their contributions based on employee income, or how are they doing that? And then part two of that question is, there a tax implication for the employee in receiving those funds from their employer?
I'm going to go as deep as I can, and then I might rely on Tamyka here a little bit too. Okay, I lost the first question already. Okay, yeah. So we set up the system, we set rate so there's kind of a set rate based on the location, the age group of the child. Talking about there's a difference for infants or preschool or school age. And so the employer's portion is sort of set in that way through the child care burden system. The state's portion is a little bit on that sliding scale. So it's more, they actually cover up to 40% of the cost for the lower income, and then it goes down to like 10%. Yeah, so for the families that are making like $550,000 or whatever. 555. Yeah. So that's kind of how we did it. We standardized it in some way, which means the parent could, at the end of the day, be paying, if they're going to a higher quality center, it's obviously going to be that amount is going to be a smaller portion, but the family still saving quite a bit of money compared to what they were. In terms of the tax implications, for the employees. So I think we do have the fee cap.
Yeah, similar to a dependent care account where we have where you need a third, to a third account, so that it's pre-tax dollars, that you know, things we have for employees.
In addition to the Medicare, 7,500,
Correct.
And there were some small changes to the those tax credits as well in that HR one that it passed. So I think the family is getting a slightly bigger child care independent tax type. I don't know. But we get into these issue. But
That's all improved.
it's not like employers' contribution is set. So,
yeah.
and so how does the employer budget for that? I think I'm just trying to think like, if the employer says we want to do this, and they have, a large number of employees. I don't know for sure who would call them negative. How do you know how much you're going to contribute to the employee?
It varies by employer, so so each employer has opportunity to say, hey, we want to, they pre-budget for it, right? So they can say, hey, we are going to make applicable for employees in your 5 years or more, or it's for all of our part-time employees, or it really depends on the employer and how they apply to the program. And they set it on budget as an employer. So we'll know as an employer, I've got this much money I can apply to really do for the year. That's how they're going to say it. And then once the employees go into the system, they'll know kind of this is how many babies. And they can ask, they can do a survey pre-application to see how many people have infants or toddlers or teenagers, kind of depending on how they will apply. So it's just dependent on the employer, how they are budgeting and how the employee was. Or they just was said not saying that 500,000.
Yeah, we tried to be a little bit flexible, but so in those communities that we engaged all over the state, they had teams that had, childcare providers, school leaders, employers, communities, and everybody was kind of contributing as we were building it up in the policy. But that was a big thing for the employers who was wanting that rate at least be kind of set, because in Michigan, they just do strictly a third of the actual cost. So in that case, if over here the parent goes to urban scrubs is $20,000 a year versus over here parent goes to more than $10,000. There's a lot more variability from the employer's perspective. And so the employers that we engage throughout the process like the idea of at least having kind of that amount they could budget a little bit better. And then when they're, the state funds again are limited, but a lot of employers are still going to be able to do that by share option, where, they're contributing whatever they contribute, the parent contributes for us. And that is, fully flexible with how it.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. There's some takeaways at the table, and if y'all have any other questions, we'll give you our email address. But thank you so much.